2 days with you all, doing a lot of listening and taking notes and making notes on drawings and measuring things out in the field and photographing things and collecting a lot of information. And this is the first time that we're sharing anything with you all, any new ideas, any drawings with you all. So I'll run through an explanation of this work. And then we'll open things up to you all to question and comment and criticize and perhaps praise. You'll be the judge of that. But this is the first of those opportunities. Okay, so we'll have one feedback cycle today. And then we'll work another 48 hours here. And then Monday night, those of you that are still interested can come back at 6:30 at the big room. And we'll have another session like this where you can critique and suggest and propose and so forth. And then we'll go back to our office and spend 3 or 4 weeks, as long as a month, working again, deliver the results to the Abby and the folks at Chattanooga Neighborhood Enterprise. And they will, with a fine-tooth comb, critique and so forth, and we will revise the drawings again. And then we'll come back and share with you more finished drawings and more thorough and complete ideas. So this is a way of lowering your expectations for today. So have I done that successfully? Okay. All right, so with that understanding of the process, the next lowering of expectations that needs to take place has to do with the area that we were asked to study. Now, as planners, we're no respecters of property lines necessarily. They're often arbitrary, and we look more at things like natural features and social boundaries and things like that, because it's a responsible thing to do, watersheds, for example. But we had to come up with some idea of what area we were going to look at. And virtually every meeting we've had, somebody has said, this is a bit off the topic, but, and today we're having a meeting about housing and improving the quality of the water in the river came up. Now, this is the size of the area that we were asked to study. We're going to have a limited impact on the quality of the water in the river looking at just this area. Not that it's not a very worthwhile objective, and not that there's not some things we could do within this boundary. But for some of those things, we may just come up with a list of things that should be looked at further. Another great one, another one that I think is fantastic is the bringing back the streetcar. Well, it'd be terrific. In some communities around the U.S. have been very successful in doing that. And it's a great way to confirm for developers where merchants, commercial businesses, where they should go, because you identify the stops on the streetcar, and of course that's where the people are, so that's where you want to look at your businesses and so forth. So they're great economic development drivers. But transportation is a part of a much larger conversation that needs to take place region-wide, and I'm sure that's being done. But what we can do is propose places for things like a transit stop here, or at least an electric bus stop. So some of these things we won't work out thoroughly simply because it's beyond the scope of the area that we're looking at. And it's not that we're trying to get out of doing work, it's just that we have an obligation to look at this area in greater detail, which is what we're going to do. But we're kind of tracking some of those other ideas. So we have a drawing missing here because they're still working on it. So as soon as that's done, it'll be rushed up here, no doubt, just in time for me to talk about it. But I'm going to start down here with a couple of the bigger picture ideas. Those of you that were here, that have been to virtually any meeting, know that connectedness is kind of the theme for this, whether it's transportation or businesses to customers, that sort of thing. There's always this idea of connections and improving connections between north and south within St. Elmo to Alton Park, St. Elmo to downtown, the streets to the trails, all sorts of connections. One thing that's interesting, I've talked about this a little bit before, is the 1911 plan that John Nolan did. And you should look closely at this because he had that idea 100 years ago. And one really beautiful move that he made was this suggestion of a greenway following the river through this. And what I particularly like about this is that it groups Alton Park and these other Oak Hill and the other neighborhoods there with St. Elmo. Kind of captures them all together and forms a nice loop. So you could hike or bike this greenway and then come back through St. Elmo and do the same loop. So kind of it groups those neighborhoods in a way that I think it provides the edge. That's quite nice. It's a bigger move, but I think one that should be investigated further. There's also been a lot of talk about needing alternate means of connection through St. Elmo, through Alton Park, from Alton Park to St. Elmo, and so forth. And one of the big problems, it seems, is the through traffic down Tennessee, because it's impossible to sit at a sidewalk cafe and have a conversation, or on your front porch even, with the trucks roaring by and that sort of thing. So there needs to be several options there. If there's interest in slowing the traffic on Tennessee and St. Elmo, some of that traffic needs an alternate way to go. This plan actually suggested some of the alternate ways by making Central Avenue a proper boulevard. And there's the possibility of opening a connection up down near the state line that involves connecting near Lee Street and Central. The exact trajectory, I don't know, remember, that's our study area. But as we study this area, it becomes clear that having alternate routes that parallel the main drag through St. Elmo is something that needs to be considered, both to slow the traffic and reduce the volume as well. Okay, now, looking at the connections from Alton Park to St. Elmo, there's one right now, 40th Street, right out here. The reason it's particularly tough, well, there's two. There's also the state one, right? Those are the two main connections. The reason this was particularly tough is because it's only a lively street at certain times, like when you're having a planning charrette. Then you get action going on here. The rec center stays quite busy. That's where we've been, obviously, the past couple days, and it's busy almost all the time. But it shuts down at night. So then forgive me, but it's a dead street, right? And for it to be a viable connection, I think enlivening that street would be a good idea. So to that end, what this drawing is suggesting is a couple of things. First, that you might consider what happens in the space between the rec center and the school in 40th Street. Right now, it's a big green swath in front of the school and parking in front of the rec center. And nothing happens in front of the school. In fact, it's a curious design. I know it was built at a time when kids walked to school. But it still surprised me that there wasn't a little drop-off loop of some sort in front of the school. And now what happens, we had our meeting there with the school superintendent last week. And you park in the back, and then you get out of your car, and you look at the back of the building. There's a big sign that says door, over where you're supposed to go in. There's no clue otherwise, because you enter through the back door. Meanwhile, the architect, thoughtfully enough, created two really nice entrances on the front of that building that, as far as I can tell, no one would ever use today. But it's the coolest place to enter the building. So one of the things that we thought might be a good idea here would be to add a drive. There's several large trees out front, but there's room to add a drive in front of the school. That could be just a one-way loop with parking on both sides. And then once we've provided the parking in front, you would constantly see that there are people here, because the cars would tell you that, right? And you'd see people coming and going, and there's movement and life and so forth, which frees up the parking lot and back for something else. Okay? A similar strategy could be proposed in front of the rec center. No doubt, you need parking and so forth in front of the rec center, but parking lots with no cars in them aren't very attractive. They're only somewhat more attractive with cars in there. At least, it's a sign that there's life, something going on there. But a street with parallel parking, when the parallel parking's missing, it just still looks like a street. Looks acceptable. Sometimes the parking's there, sometimes it's not. So we actually proposed that at some point you might consider that extending that parking street past the rec center as well, still providing both sides, parking on both sides. But you might create essentially a central park in front of these civic buildings along 40th Street that becomes more activated, simply by moving the parking. Now you'll also notice here we're suggesting that there could be some housing added down where the picnic tables and the swing sets are and so forth. You pay a price for that because there's obviously picnic tables and swing sets there. But wouldn't it be a great thing to activate the green in front of the rec center with something like picnic tables and swing sets? So there's a natural relationship now between this building and a public green space in front that activates 40th Street. So you wouldn't feel quite so lonely out there on 40th because there'd be other people activating that space. So simply by moving some of that equipment, either in front of the school building or in front of the rec center, you could activate a nice central park there and free this up for some of the housing that could go there. Now, a word about the housing. There's a study floating around. We've talked about this in some of the housing meetings that suggests that in the next 3 to 6 years, there could be a demand for 275 additional housing units. That's the professional jargon here in the St. Elmo in the study area. Now, not all of that's single-family detached housing. Some of that is townhouses, and some is multifamily, and the multifamily breaks down into both for sale and for rent. So there's a range of types within the 275. One thing we've done is we're starting to propose adding housing. By the time we're done, we'll be able to show you how much of the housing we're accommodating here and where. And what we may wind up doing is showing more than the market demands, and then you all can help us subtract. You may subtract all of it. That's up to you and say, thanks, we like the park just the way it is. That's up to you. But if you decide to consider the additional housing, then we'll give you options for where that might go, and you can help decide what makes sense. Now, one idea that I think is particularly interesting, and I need a little help on the street names. What's the street between the post office and the fire station? West 30. Yes. What is it again? Pirola. Okay, you all know Pirola between the. Okay. So we go from the school to the rec center to the post office, then across the street is the firehouse, and then the library set back. When you look down 40th Street, right now you look straight into the parking lot in front of the library. In fact, the library is set so far back, you don't know it's there when you look down 40th Street because all you see is the parking lot. There's some trees in front and so forth. It's not like you just see parking. But you certainly don't see a beautiful Carnegie Library facade, that invites it, that in the same way that, Shepherd's Arms sits up on top of that hill saying, I'm an important building in an important location. You could, over time, consider moving the library or building a new building that terminated this vista down 40th Street. So visually, when you're down at one end of 40th and you look down, you actually see a library. It's a great invitation to draw you down up toward Alton Park. And then in front there, you have that kind of slathering of pavement, where two streets fork and Piroli comes in and they're sort of at an angle. And some of that's necessary so that fire trucks can get out and turn the big trucks around. But if we look at the more detailed version, here's the rec center, here's the post office, the fire station, the library. We're suggesting you pull the library up, put the parking in back. Actually, the very narrow street that C&E did a while back could be connected to the square with a pedestrian path between the library and the fire station. You end up with a green square here. You could make the area in front of the fire station simply a plaza. So keep the paving, but a little more order. I know we're into funky and unique and all of this here, but just a bit of order here because it's potentially a very important, prominent civic space that actually sits exactly between these two neighborhoods, even more weighted toward Alton Park. So you could have a really nice civic plaza and civic green down here as an anchor. That's one way to draw folks from St. Elmo toward Alton Park and meet in the middle. And then this building, because of the activity of the library, the fire station, and the post office, might be a great location for a corner store, neighborhood business that would meet some of the daily needs of folks within that pedestrian shed. And another way to do that, to accomplish that, would be there's that kind of green triangle where there's very little built. Those could be little mixed-use buildings. So somebody could have a small business live above or rent a space out above, so forth. So that's what you're seeing right here. But the idea is to create a neighborhood center, a civic square in front of your civic buildings down there. The drawing that's missing is going to show one further evolution of that. So I'll get to that. In just a minute. Let me straighten this out a little bit. Okay. So a few other. So that's essentially what's going on with this edge. The safe walk is interesting. We walked it last night. We were the only ones out there. I know it's used sometimes. Some people, kind of shortcut through there. Some students going to the rec center, or people going to the BILO, that sort of thing. But you do feel sort of lonely or conspicuous along the safe walk. Somebody said it needs better lighting. Well, as far as I can tell, there's a light fixture about every 10 feet. Most of them still work. Somebody else said, half of them don't work. Most are working. The thing about brighter lighting back there is that we see by contrast. So if you make the fixture bright, and then there's a dark spot in between, it actually is tougher for the eye to adjust than if it's a more even, lower level of lighting along the walk. As close as the fixtures are, it doesn't seem to me that they need to be brighter. It seems to me that you need more people using that space, and then it would feel safer. Okay, so one way to get more people using that space would be to consider making the walk into a street. And I think that's possible. We're showing two routes here. One follows, which is the reason for the curve. One follows the safe walk exactly, winds up past the tennis courts and down. We moved it down a little further to get past the end of the shopping center, the end of the BILO, and then connecting to the plateau here. And then we're still looking at this. We need a larger scale drawing, which we're still getting printed out here, to look at the possibility of connecting up the steep grade behind there. But there are two options for how this might connect through as a street. And this would be a street of sufficient width that you could accommodate pedestrians and bicyclists and 2 lanes of traffic and parking on the street and so forth. And then this is a row of residences facing that street here. And another row over here that would have great views into the wetlands behind, and then also double load that street, housing on both sides here. And then we will make a proper connection to the multifamily housing here. Right now somebody has ripped a hole in the fence and put it as a path through the woods and that sort of thing, but there's no reason we can't actually make a path with a bridge, appropriate bridge over the wetlands here. So that's what this drawing is about. Okay, I'm about ready for, and it's about ready for break. Yep. Oh, great. Okay, great. This is the beginning of some of the evolution that the streets are likely to go through. This particular one, we've measured, I don't know, a dozen or so of the streets. This particular one is Central Avenue along here. And what we're realizing is that with 35 feet curb to curb out there, you have 15 feet or so of grass next to the cemetery fence, 15 feet 3 inches or something. And then on the school side, there's just a narrow little strip of green and then a 4.5 foot sidewalk.
Are you referring to 40th?
What did I say? I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Central's the first one. Yeah, I went in the wrong. Yeah, thank you. 40th. Thank you. Yes, correct me at any time. So it seems like 40th, because you have so much pavement already, 35 feet is a lot of pavement for 2 lanes of traffic, that it would be quite easy to install a row of bollards parallel to the cemetery side that would mark out an 8-foot bike lane on that side, could be a two-way bike lane. The great thing about that is that there are no curb cuts on that side, so it's a great dedicated route for bicyclists. You'd still have room for 2 lanes of traffic, and then even parking on the school side. Because now, if you think about that, this central green idea, you could park all 4 sides of that green, and it's no further to walk from a parking space on that street to the front door of the school than BILO expects you to walk from the back of their parking lot to the front door of the store. So you'll still have parking spaces up close, but then some further away, which might be more convenient if you're taking your kids to the park. Anyway, so the idea here is that we would park on this side of 40th, on all sides of the Central Park. So we're just in the beginning stages of getting the dimension drawings drawn, and then illustrating what options there would be there. Okay, so now moving closer into the center. Okay, where to begin here? Let's start at the center and work out. The one interesting thing here is this incline that you have. Interesting is an understatement. Very few neighborhoods have an incline they can brag about. Yet it's possible for an outsider like me to blow right through St. Elmo and never know the incline was there. I know there are signs for it. The signs aren't. There's a lot of competition for the signage, and there's no visual clue. The structure that's there now, it's nice, the structure, but it looks a lot like a residential front porch. There's nothing unique about this. There's nothing nearly as unique about the structure around the incline as the incline itself. Then the other curious thing is that once you find the parking lot, you park in the parking lot, you pay for your parking. So you park near the incline. Then you have to go up the hill to pay at the little fluorescent lit kiosk in the middle of the parking lot. And then once you pay for your parking, you go directly to the incline, pay for your ticket, wait sometimes for up to 2 hours, I'm told, and then ride up the hill, get off, look around. There's nothing to do there. You can't get anywhere else from up there. And then you ride back down with your wallet $20 lighter, or whatever it is. More if you have kids with you. There's a missed opportunity in there somewhere. So among the conversations we've had is this idea of timed ticketing, for one thing. So you could buy your ticket instead of waiting in line for 2 hours. You could go see Matt at Pasha's for coffee, or go have a burrito, or do some shopping, or what have you. You could explore St. Elmo a bit. That is if you can find St. Elmo. Because remember, right now, you still buy your ticket there, and you haven't set foot in St. Elmo yet. So one thing I think that should be up for consideration is moving the ticket kiosk down to the little plaza at the base of the intersection. So people buying a ticket have to walk past the incline, down to the end of where St. Elmo tees into Tennessee, and buy the ticket there. And then once they get the ticket and realize they've got an hour to kill, they look around and figure out what they're going to do, and you're offering all kinds of options for them. But you've got to get them to that spot first. So that's one thing. So we're showing the ticket kiosk next to your big, the sculpture that you're having done. That cool wheel that tells your history. So right next to that. So then they buy this ticket, and there's your whole history, and they can look around. Okay, so that's one thought. Now, when we had that conversation with Carta, we were surprised to learn that the equipment that Bill, who owns Rock City, has installed he runs the concessions for the incline, that has the capability of selling time tickets. All he has to do is throw a switch. So we thought, great, wouldn't that be great? Well, the Carta people want to study it first, which that's what they do first, but they agreed to study it, so track that. Okay, see how they're doing that. Personally, the way I would study it is on a Friday I'd flip that switch, and then on Monday I'd see how well it worked. So I think that's at least as legitimate a means of studying it as whatever they might have in mind. Okay, but make sure you track that with Carta that they studied out. Now, another interesting thing that came up in the discussion with Carta is that one of their most profitable shuttle routes used to be the one at the top of the incline that took people to Ruby Falls and to Rock City. So they're also open to studying that again to see if having that route in place might make sense. I know there's some issues with that because that runs a shuttle past residential homes. But that shuttle stands to absorb a bunch of car traffic, and I think folks might be offered that option, that choice of whether they'd rather have a shuttle every 15 minutes or, whatever it is, 15 or 20 cars every 10 minutes or something. So two great things that CARTA is willing to consider, one at the top and one at the bottom of the incline. We also have some thoughts about their parking lot. We didn't get quite that far. We thought we were doing pretty well with those two things, but we're going to keep talking to them. Their parking lot offers some opportunities as Tennessee passes by, because right now there are two driveway connections, only one's used, and then there's a bunch of grass down there. There's an opportunity to reinforce the pedestrian nature of that street by having a building along that edge. This scheme actually matches the building to the one next door. What's the little deli in that building with the parking in front?
St. Elmo Deli.
St. Elmo. Okay. Okay. To be fair, I had lunch there like 2 visits ago, so that's why I didn't remember that name. We liked the idea that they came up with 10 or 12 years ago, the RPA, of connecting that parking lot off the entrance to the CARTA parking lot instead of off the street, because you get a little more green space, a little more plaza out here. So we brought that idea back into this plan. But there's I think an even better evolution of that. Here that would move the St. Elmo Deli to the back of the sidewalk and its parking behind. And the same for a new building next to the CARTA parking lot. Put that building on the street, its parking behind. So you really could continue that pedestrian-friendly street front all the way down to this light at this point. So that's an option that could evolve over time in that location. I am going to, when I get to these drawings, show some thoughts about Virginia Avenue and the ditch that connects. There's an interesting conversation about how at 42nd Street, the public works ditch essentially disappears. What happens to that water? Well, it gets piped, but sometimes there's a problem when it disappears because people forget about it, and then all of a sudden there's a sinkhole in front of your ATM as a little reminder, and it sure seems like, in fact, if you look at the old Sanborn maps, they're full of all kinds of interesting information, like there's a stream running through here. Like, no kidding. They knew it 100 years ago. It runs right through here. So one of the things we're suggesting here is that in addition to bringing the bikes down, you might bring the stream down as well. And then we have some photographs of how Salt Lake City's done that very effectively to essentially daylight a little stream like that we'll show you. The monument site is a great opportunity. I think for a 2 or even 3-story what we call flat iron building, that wedge-shaped building. So that's the possibility that we're showing here. And then we thought maybe the monument business could be located across the street from the cemetery, and next to the funeral home, and that perhaps the end building and this row of housing that we were proposing near the park could be a live-work unit that might even be a florist, and you get kind of one-stop shopping. For all that sort of thing, right here on this corner. Your triangle intersection here. There have been a couple schemes drawn for that. Some by our designers, and then some by the Think Bike crowd. Think Bike did 2 different schemes there. One was a circle. I shared with you some of my reservations about circles the other night. And one of the designers said, "Well, why not just have a T intersection there?" And drew that, and it seems to make complete sense to me. So you would make a hard left to continue down 40th in this direction. And it's those big curb radii, that let traffic keep moving fast.
Would there be a light there?
Lights have to be warranted. So you have to have so many trip movements in this or that direction, so many turning movements and that sort of thing. So it's very rare, nearly impossible, to simply say we would like there. They do same for stop signs. We can't just call up and get a stop sign. So I can't say whether there'd be a light there or not. More likely, if I were to pick a place for a light, it would be the your Tennessee St. Elmo intersection.
Amen.
Not as much to stop traffic, but to give pedestrians a chance to get across the street. Okay, so that's what's happening here. And then moving further down, this was an interesting idea. Moving further down, several plans have proposed a staircase up to the Bilo Plateau, right? Well, it's a great idea, and the question is, where's the best location for that staircase? And it seemed to me that the best location was one that brought you down to that intersection, so that if we did get a light there, it's the place where you would most expect pedestrians to be crossing. Landing them in the middle of a block, drivers just don't expect to find pedestrians there. And if you bring a stair down there, where's the pedestrian going to cross? So we think bringing it down in the vicinity of that intersection makes sense. And then somebody said, yeah, but connecting straight to the Bilo parking lot isn't that attractive. So they proposed this idea of what we call liner buildings, a very thin building that masks something less attractive behind it. And I pulled an example of where we're doing that in a neighborhood up in Louisville, Kentucky. So on the front, and this may not be the exact, I'm not proposing this architect, we literally just took it from that project to give you the idea. So it's not necessarily this style building or this floor plan layout, but the way this works, it looks like a series of little cottages or little townhouses. They could be attached or detached. They do a better job screening what's behind if they're attached. And the particular unit has a one-car garage on the ground floor, so that's this window. And then the door and window are into a small living dining kitchen. And then upstairs you have 2 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. So it's a very small unit. It's only the depth, a little more deep than a parking space, but with a proper front porch and so forth. You could take the least used parking of all in the Bilo parking lot, and on that ridge, on the brow, shall we say, you could line the brow with a pedestrian path, a promenade, that provides a great place for small units, for people to live affordably in St. Elmo and start to mask that parking lot. So a pedestrian could walk up, slip between these buildings and still get to the Bilo, or walk the promenade down to the end where we're suggesting another pedestrian connection down to this light. Okay? And then here we've taken a few liberties with some of the existing buildings and some of the existing parking lots, because right now you have nearly this every other situation where one lot is parking and one lot is a building. The parking goes all the way back and the building goes all the way back. If there were ever the opportunity to rearrange the same footprints and put the buildings along the street and the parking in back, you'd have a much nicer street, and you could actually connect the parking lots continuously across the back. Clearly, that takes cooperation from a variety of property owners along here. But I think long term, that's the direction that this should move. This piece I'm going to show you on a more detailed plan. This is between Richard's building and where Pasha in 1885 is. Okay, so here's Pasha's building down here, and Richard's building here, and then there's that area, the open space in between that's parking. That on Richard's end is fairly efficiently used, just double loaded head-in parking along the street, and then the ground jumps up to street level, and it's not quite as efficiently used as parking. It's not quite as clear where to park. If there were the opportunity, what would be ideal there is to depress that as it is on one end, perhaps even a little further. We need to know more about that pipe that runs through underneath. But if there were the opportunity to depress that even further, you could do a series of liner buildings on either side of that parking. So you're parking below now, and maybe a couple steps up to the building, or not, depending. And have a row of 2 buildings here that would continue the urban fabric, continue the street front along that edge, so you get a continuous pedestrian experience along that edge. Now, In this scheme, if you look closely, you'll have an opportunity when we're done to come up and look closely. In this scheme, what we thought would be interesting is, you see this one bends the buildings in the middle, this one runs them straight. The reason for that is because that stream came up again, and maybe it makes sense to remind people that there is a stream there and daylight that little piece. So if you run them straight, you get a little piece of park here where you could daylight a piece of that stream and perhaps handle some of the storm water that this block generates. Then moving further down, this is the bank site. There's a lot of confusion about what's going on there now. Apparently it's owned by a REIT in Florida. There's some rumors that it's sold, but no one's confirmed that. You've all gotten letters, I suppose, that the bank's moving out. And the consensus seems to be that the reason is they don't want to spend $1 million to fix the sinkhole that's appeared in front of the ATM machine. So who knows at this point what could be done here. But what we think you might do is daylight that stream again along this edge. And then a building of this shape that creates a little plaza on this corner could be a great place for a restaurant to spill out. It does a couple things here. It starts to hold the edge of this street. It also masks a little bit of what's going on here from the plaza. And then lines the street in this direction. And there's another, oh yes, and then Frank has shown the more ambitious scheme here, pulling the building up to the corner, just a very tiny plaza with perhaps your next piece of civic art on this corner. This could be parking or an internal courtyard behind. And then what Frank has done is to flip the gas station. So you've got the building and the canopy, right? If the building were actually out to the street and the canopy behind, it would actually be possible to walk, past the convenience store. Curiously, the bus stops right now in front of the gas station canopies. Now, if I had to guess any place that there were going to be lots of cars and not so many people, it would be at the gas station canopies. But if you flipped it and put the convenience store in the front, that's a place you might run in to get a paper coffee if you were a pedestrian or bicyclist or so forth. So it's really tough to pull that off, because the gas station wants you to see the pumps, they want the bright lighting, on and on and on. But cities like Charleston have done it, so it's possible. Tougher once it's in place, but so an idea to keep in mind should they come in asking to expand or change his owners or what have you. So that's some ideas about this piece. Coming back here, there's an opportunity, a couple of vacant lots here that make sense to us as more commercial opportunities. The hope is that the buildings would be placed on the street rather than parking on the street. Somebody came in and said, where St. Elmo's Deli is, they said, well, 30, 40 years ago, the building was where the parking lot is now, and the parking was behind, and they flip-flopped it in a more conventional manner. Hopefully we could get to this owner first and say, look, put your building at the street and the parking behind. And then so you don't have to look at the parking lot, there could be residential lots on either side. With a garage in the back end, it's perfectly acceptable to have a garage facing a parking lot. So it's the same kind of use. So that's what's going on that spot. Along this edge, there are limited opportunities there simply because of the ownership and the use of that property. But there is the possibility here of taking advantage of the fact that most of that property is owned by one entity and knocking on the door politely and asking if some of that frontage might be made available to accommodate your Riverwalk connection. There's actually room between their building and a couple of large trees for that connection to be made. And then for the price of 3 parking spaces in their lot, it could be continued past this parking lot and run all the way down to the corner and in the kind of width that you'd want for the Riverwalk. It gets tougher here, but on this edge, there's still the opportunity to get what you want. And the way you pay them back for taking 3 of their parking spaces is to allow them to have on-street parking along the whole length of that street. There's probably 20 or 30 parking spaces along there, which is great for slowing traffic. And frankly, I think a better place, better than having the bikes next to the cars, would be to move them over, separate them with the row of trees and so forth. So there's that. We'll draw that up in section. That's coming along that edge. Hey, you designers should be letting me know when I leave things out as I go through. I think that's most of the issues here. This drawing is about some of the trail connections. We've had people explain they've moved here from great distances to live in St. Elmo so they can get to the trails, only to find that they can see the trail from the end of the street, but they can't get there. And we're surprised to learn that the right-of-way is actually in place to connect them. It's just a matter of making that connection. So part of what we're doing here is showing how some of those connections might be made. It seems obvious enough, but we need just an extra push to make that happen. We've talked about this idea of. Can I see the code for a second? On the we talked about a bunch of ideas that have to do with either zoning issues or architectural guideline issues. They're two different things. Zoning is law, guidelines are just sort of suggestions. And you have the opportunity to do both in this commercial area. I was surprised to learn that in the state of Tennessee, you can't have a style restrictive guideline. So I don't know the fact that that's the case, but that's what somebody's told me. So I'm sort of testing it. So if there are lawyers out there that know about that sort of thing and could inform me, other places you can do that. Okay, good question. There's a difference between, we talk a lot about type and style. Type is form determined by function, confirmed by culture. Okay, the best example I can give you of that is, it's more simple than it sounds. If I showed you a glass and a mug and asked you to put the hot liquid in one and the cold liquid in the other, you'd put the cold liquid in the glass and the hot liquid in the mug. Why? Because the mug has a handle. Form, determined by function, confirmed by culture. We all know. You put the hot stuff in the... Okay, the same thing's true for housing. A townhouse is one type of housing. A single-family detached house is another type of housing. A live-work unit is another type. Style is Victorian or arts and crafts. Okay, and you can have a Victorian house or an arts and crafts house. The type is, they're both houses, but they're just different styles. Okay, so from what I understand, in Tennessee you can't restrict style. Okay, but you can code for type. Okay, and that's what these form-based codes do. So it wasn't part of what we thought we were doing when we came here, but there's been such interest in getting the form right. Like some people have said, we love the idea of having a hotel here, but we don't want a chain. Okay? Well, the way not to get a chain is to control the form through your zoning. For example, if you said you can have a restaurant, a new restaurant in St. Elmo, but it has to have residential or housing above. Do you think you'd ever get a Denny's? Or pick your favorite chain. Those chains they're only restaurants, right? So if it's the form and not the fact that they, serve hamburgers or lunch or breakfast or what have you, it's not the business they're in that matters. It's the form. Then better to get a zoning ordinance in that controls form. Okay, and the way form-based codes do that is by identifying types and permitting some types and not others. Okay, so we've already started drafting a form-based code for St. Elmo. There'll be more on that Monday night. We'll show you some more specific examples of what we mean by that. One of the things I got most excited about when I was reading that RPA study that was done 12 or 15 years ago is that they were recommending the auxiliary dwelling unit. Okay, so I brought that up the other night, and everybody says, "Oh, you can't do that anywhere in Chattanooga." But to me, it makes complete sense to allow somebody the opportunity to have an auxiliary apartment as on their lot. Okay, they can come in many different forms. The English most commonly do them as the daylit basement. They raise the townhouse halfway, they set the sidewalk back, there's a light well there, and they rent the basement of the townhouse out. And they're absolutely charming. It's not at all uncommon on the East Coast to find apartments above garages. In the neighborhood I live in, that's the preferred type of auxiliary unit. Now, we wrote a few rules in the code that said the footprint is limited in size because people didn't want whole families moving into the backyard. They also, one or the other has to be owner-occupied. Cleverly, a single woman bought a house in my neighborhood, and on moving day, she didn't move into the house, she moved into the apartment above the garage and made $100 a month on her mortgage when she rented the house out. So the wealthy family that was renting the house was paying her mortgage and then some. She had a free place to live, but that was all she needed, all she wanted at that particular time. Later she reversed that. So I think auxiliary apartments are something, or let's say auxiliary units are something that you might consider. One of the places that I thought would be most interesting to consider that, where we are here, I don't know if you had a chance to look at this or not, but this is Virginia Avenue. There's a stretch where it's particularly charming where the ditch is exposed. It's quite a nice, a few people have little charming little bridges over there. Well, I think there's an opportunity there to consider auxiliary units of some limited size so that those avid bikers that are moving from places like Seattle to live here don't have to deal with cars. They don't have to deal with garages or parking spaces, and they could live in a little house on the bike lane here and simply walk out the front door and bike downtown to work. It seems like it'd be quite delightful. And it's a way for people who are attempting to maintain some of your old housing stock to benefit from this change in code by producing some income. So they could build a small structure in the back end of their lot, perhaps even sell it off. I don't know, you have to change some of your lot line rules so that somebody could purchase back there, but certainly to rent it. So that's one thought we had about. And then this one hasn't come up yet, but the idea of entrance almost came up because people started talking about the identity of St. Elmo. And I was let's see, the first time I came in from Chattanooga, I took the interstate to get to the downtown area, and the second time I took Brainerd Avenue just because I didn't know any better. And but I wanted to see something different, And there's one really interesting commercial stretch that goes through there. And if you're a fan of the mid-century modern buildings, like there's this pharmacy with this roof that does this. Some of you know the one I mean? Well, I'm sorry? Yeah. Okay. But anyway, there's something going on. But what really caught my eye were the markers for the Belvoir neighborhood. Those streets that go back in, and they have the little piers that come out. Absolutely charming. And you don't even have to drive back there. There's something special back there. There's something people care about and so forth. Okay, do you know where we are here? Probably not because it's too small. I apologize for that. But come up and look when we're done here. This is the entrance. So I got all excited about proposing some stone entrance piers or something, for St. Elmo. And then I took another look, and you actually have one. Do you know that? It's kind of a little grown over. Some of you do. Okay, we'll come down here, and I think what you could do, without a lot of effort, is to match that, put a proper sign with it, another one on the other side, and announce the entrance.
What we're looking at again?
Yeah, if you come up close, this is Tennessee at the state line, looking north into St. Elmo.
Or St. Elmo Avenue? St. Elmo Avenue?
I'm sorry. You know how they crisscross?
switch.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I thank you.
Okay, so coming from Georgia, we're looking into Tennessee.
So you're coming from Georgia, you're looking into Tennessee, and there's a
there
sort
used
of,
to be stone signs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's still one
Yeah.
looking a little forgotten.
The city took all the stone from the other one and stored it somewhere, and nobody knows where it is.
That's why they're
Okay.
sticking.
Well, there has to be some more rock left. So I think the idea of recovering that entrance, I know it's outside our study area, but I think it's something you all should consider doing as well. So I think that's, how about from the design team, am I leaving things out here? Pretty good overview. Okay, so this is generally where we are now. I'm sure we haven't gotten to everything that's on the list of ideas and suggestions that have been made previously, but you'll see a lot more of those ideas incorporated into the things we share with you on Monday night at 6:30 in the big room. You'll actually be able to see them because we're going to do the screen.